Hello there and welcome to the Card Grotto. Today I'm back with another of my back to basics features. This one is talking about ink pads. I'm probably not the best qualified again to talk about ink pads. I do have quite a few different ones that I'm going to talk about. I haven't kind of experimented that much, so I tend to stick with the ones that I know. There are, however, lots of videos on YouTube and sort of in the card making sort of blogosphere about different ink pads, so I'd advise you maybe to go and see those, but I am going to talk about what I know. So first of all, I'm going to talk about dye inks, probably my most used type of ink. I have a few different ones here that I use the most. I have paper tray ink, which unfortunately isn't available in the UK, obviously because they're an American company. You can get them shipped over. Obviously shipping's quite expensive, so if you're worried about that, then obviously that's probably not one for you to go for. Memento dye inks, which are easily to get here in the UK. They sell them at Dies to Die For. They also sell them at the Glitter Pot. Obviously there is a few other shops. Those two would be the ones that I would personally shop at. And then there's the Hero Art Shadow inks, which up until now generally has been very difficult to get here in the UK. They are still obviously not easy. Stamp Lot has a few. I think they've sold out. After I last mentioned it, I apologise that a few of them, or majority of them, were already sold out. There is a shop now in the UK called Craft Mojo. I haven't ordered from them, so I can't kind of comment on their customer service or anything like that, but they do have a lot of them in stock, sort of more towards the ones that when they first came out, the colours that first came out, but they do have some, which obviously is really great for us here in the UK, because I know how difficult it is to get hold of these things. So the paper tray ink dye ink, I wouldn't really use it for these kind of block images. I'd more use it for sort of flowers or sentiments and things like that. They do have a nice wide range of colours, and that's why I like the paper tray ink ones, and I can get them in the cubes, which is really good because I like sort of having lots of storage space. The Memento dye inks, I really like these inks a lot. As you can see, there's quite a nice impression. Obviously I missed out the middle slightly, but really nice vivid colours. I really like the Memento inks especially. Sometimes they can become a little bit blotchy with these types of block stamping. I would advise that if it comes out a little splotchy, when you stamp, to stamp with a stamp positioner. You know, the actual kind of the plate bit of the stamp positioner, this bit, and stamp with a you know, a square or a rectangular stamp, and just kind of place this on, and then if you don't get a great impression the first time, you could always restamp it, and then you've got this in place so that you know exactly where you want to restamp. Obviously the colour does become slightly darker, but it does mean that it's not so blotchy if you have that kind of problem. And then Hero Arts, obviously a really great ink. I like it a lot. I do especially like it for block stamping. That's mainly what I would use it for. I don't like it for sentiments, and I don't tend to like it for line images. I don't think it gives that much of a crisp impression on my particular cardstock that I use anyway. Obviously all of these inks are going to differ on what cardstock you use. I use a particularly porous cardstock, which is Paper Tray Ink Stamper Select. It is quite a porous cardstock, especially with dye inks. They do seep into the cardstock quite a bit. The unique properties though with Hero Arts is that when you stamp, they stamp splotchy, and then when they dry quite a nice even colour. You know, occasionally they do still a tiny bit splotchy if you haven't stamped them correctly, which is, you know, my fault. And they do dry a bit lighter as well, so if you do use them, I'd advise you that you you know, you don't take what it looks like when you first stamp. They do take a little while to dry, in terms of the colour sort of being non-splotchy. All of these dry very quickly in general, so if you stamp on them and then you kind of went over them with your finger, they wouldn't smear, which is the benefit of dye inks. So dye inks generally dye the paper, that's why they're called dye. They seep into the cardstock and they are fast drying. In general, dye inks have like a felt ink pad. Sorry, it's a bit difficult to see here, the light is going here, sorry. They are generally kind of a felt based ink pad, quite a harder type of ink, you know, pad. I, as I say, use dye inks generally more than anything, just because I like the speed in which they dry. So next up, I'm going to talk about pigment ink. I don't tend to use pigment ink that much, based on the fact that they take a long time to dry. But I have 4 examples here. I've got the Brilliance inks, which are pearlescent ink, really pretty colours. You can get these here in the UK. You can get them a few different places, but mainly you can get them from the Glitter Pot. You can get these from the Glitter Pot. These are the Colour Box pigment inks. Again, this happens to be a pearlescent one, but I think they come in like, you know, normal colours. The Versacolor, which is kind of an older ink pad, you can still get them from the Glitter Pot, a pigment ink as well. And then the new Memento Luxe ink pads, which you can now get in the UK from craftycharlie.co.uk. They're the same colours as the Memento dye inks, but they are pigment ink. So the benefit of pigment ink is that you get a very good impression with them. They kind of sit on the cardstock, so you get a kind of a more vibrant colour from them basically. These are the this is the Memento Luxe. That's the impression there. As you can see on the bottom one, I've shown that you can kind of smear it. So they take a long time to dry. When I say a long time, for me they take a long time. You know, everyone obviously is different in terms of how long they're happy to leave ink to dry. You can speed it up with a heat gun, but if you do stamp it and then accidentally touch it with your finger, they are going to smear. That is the only downfall for pigment ink, but obviously there are benefits of that it dries slower. One being that it stays on the top of the surface for longer, and so you get a nice, more vibrant colour. And also you can emboss with these, heat emboss, because they stay wetter for longer, and they are more of a stickier ink. They do tend to clean better for stamps as well. I didn't say with the dye inks, they do tend to stain your ink pads. Less so with the Memento ones, more so with the Hero Arts ones. It doesn't damage the ink, but sorry, the stamps. But it is annoying for me not having clean, clear stamps. These ones too tend to clean really quite easily with a baby wipe. And then this is the Brilliance one. Again, really nice impression here. Again, they can be smeared if you don't leave them to dry long enough. The good thing with these ones is they're pearlescent, which gives a nice, you know, if you happen to want a pearlescent image, it's really nice, which you wouldn't get with dye inks. So that's quite a nice little feature there. So these are all available, like I said, in the UK. And next up is kind of a, I guess, a hybrid ink. And then it's half between a dye ink and half between a pigment ink, and that's chalk ink. I really like chalk ink. I haven't used it in a long time actually, but you've got the Versamagic chalk inks, again available from the Glitter Pot, and the Colour Box chalk ink. I have to be honest with you, I cannot remember where I got this from, but I did definitely get it in the UK, although it was a long time ago. I really like these. They basically stamp out like a chalk, so they are a nice smooth consistency. When they stamp nice and smooth. That's an example here of the Versamagic one, and again really nice. You can get more of a sort of a vibrant colour from them, really pretty. Another example of a dye ink, although I wouldn't actually use it for stamping personally, is the Distress inks. The Tim Holtz Distress inks. These are kind of a unique dye ink. They kind of work well with water. They react to water quite well. They're just kind of a unique dye ink basically. I would use it more for these kind of blending techniques, like I've done here with a blending tool, or you could use an ink dauber, things like that. They're just really nice to blend. They really, you know, they work really well with water. so like as a watercolour and things like that, but I wouldn't personally stamp with them. You can stamp with them, but I wouldn't personally stamp with them. So that's kind of a separate thing, along the lines of being a kind of separate ink is the Versamark ink. Again, this isn't quite a necessarily a stamping ink, although it can be. You could use it and just stamp, say like on a craft cardstock or a darker kind of cardstock, and get basically like a darker impression, like a watermarked effect. But also it can be used for heat embossing. It's a really sticky kind of ink pad. It's foam, like the Pigment ones. I don't know if I actually said that. Pigment ink pads tend to be foam as the actual ink pad themselves. This is the same. This is a sponge, and it's just a really sticky ink, and it works really well with embossing powder. So next I'm going to talk about my favourite black inks. And they do fall into the categories that I've already talked about. The first one is Memento Tuxedo Black. I use this almost 90% of the time when I'm stamping in black. It's really good with Copic markers. It doesn't react with them. The ink doesn't smear with the Copic markers. The only thing I find with Memento, the black in particular, is that it's not a particularly dark black. However, this is probably an older ink pad. I've been using it for a little while. It's far from dried up in the slightest, but I do find that when I tend to stamp and I get little feathery bits, it's because the ink pad is sort of, it's not drying up, but it's just not as good as it used to be, and that's kind of for me when I know that I need to change it if I'm not getting slightly a crisp as impression as I did before. But I absolutely love it. I use it, as I said, 90% of the time for either sentiments or for stamping images and then colouring with Copic markers. The next one that I really like is the Versafine. This is the Versafine Onyx Black. Versafine do other ink pads, by the way. These are a pigment ink. I just don't have any of the colour ones. Again, I really like it. The only downfall for me is that it's pigment, and so it takes a little while to dry, and it means that I could smear it quite easily, and I have done it on a few occasions. Even here on this bit of cardstock, I managed to get a bit on my finger and I smeared it on the cardstock. That is the problem for me, is that I'm likely to do that. I don't tend to use it that much, but as you can see, it's a really crisp image. It's also quite a dark black, which I really like. So if I know that I really want the sentiment to pop out and it to be dark black, then I will use this ink pad as opposed to the Memento. You can speed up the drying of these ink pads, by the way, with a heat gun. But I'm too lazy to do that, so I don't tend to do it that often. Next one is the Brilliance, which is a pigment ink like I mentioned before. This is the graphite black. I don't use it that much, although I really should, because again it gives a really nice crisp image. It's quite a dark black. It's just the downfall that it takes a little while to dry, but again you could use it if you wanted to emboss. If you wanted a clear emboss over this, for example, then you could do that with the Brilliance ink. And then next up, if you wanted a watercolour, you know, with ink, like using Memento ink pad for Copic markers, as opposed to, you in general wouldn't use that many other ink pads. There are a few, and you can heat set them and things like that, but personally I would stick to Memento. But otherwise, for watercolouring, you need the same kind of thing. You need a waterproof ink. These are two examples. You've got the Archival ink from Ranger and the StazOn ink here. The StazOn ink probably is the one that I've used for the longest. I used it a lot in the past. The downfall with both of these is that they are harder to clean. You can get StazOn cleaner, which you could use with both of them. You can use with any ink, by the way. You don't obviously have to use it for StazOn. The only downfall for this is you cannot use it with clear stamps. It does damage the polymer. in the stamps, so I wouldn't, you know, definitely don't use it on clear stamps, but it's okay with the rubber stamps. You can use this, however, which is the Ultra Clean clear design from Hero Arts. This is a really good stamp, all-round stamp cleaner. It is blue, but you know, just happens to be blue, I guess. It's really good for this, for these two inks, and also really good for the Versafine. I do tend to struggle a bit to clean the Versafine as well, so I use this quite a lot. I just thought I would pop that in there for you. But otherwise, both of these are a very good ink pad. To me, there's not really much difference between them, apart from the fact that Stays On smells like almonds. It's quite a strong smell. I personally don't mind it at all. But I know some people don't like the smell of it, so that might be something to think of if you're thinking about which one to get. They both stamp quite dark black ink, and again, both quite a crisp image. So you'd want to use this if you were using distress inks, and also if you were, you know, and then distressing over the top, by the way, if you were inking this first. You could obviously use one of the other ink pads if you were just stamping over the top of, you know, some ink blending you were doing. You should also use these with distress inks if you're using water with them, if you're using distress markers or stamping right markers, watercolour pencils, watercolour inks, you know, all of that. Anything to do with water, you need a waterproof ink pad for. So that is my my thing on ink pads. Like I said, it is the basics. I will try and, as much as I can, link to everything down in the description bar. The only exception to the ink pads that I own, that I got from the US, is the Paper Tray ink ones and the Hero Art Shadow inks, but like I said, you can now get them in the UK. So I hope that's helped some of you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.